Hi, I've decided to record this video after a couple of people had contacted me on Discord and asked me how they best could argue against the labor theory of value. So this video is for them and for every other person who doesn't know how to argue against it. So consider it to be some sort of a tutorial, but before understanding how to argue against it, it is crucial to understand what it is that you're arguing against in the first place. And in the minds of the socialists, the labor theory of value is understood as the capitalist stealing the surplus gain from selling a product, thereby stealing it from the worker to which it supposedly belongs. That is, of course, if we assume three fundamental things. The value of labor can be measured objectively through an equation, and it will equate the constant capital of materials used to produce a product and the amount of hourly labor by the worker to the final price of the product. In other words, if the wage of the worker equals to $20 and the price of materials and other expenses is equal to $10 and the capitalist had sold the final product for $40, the worker is owed an extra $10 while the contribution of the capitalist is simply ignored. The second assumption ignores other external factors such as workers' benefits, experience, cost of investment, risks, and other various financial operations which determine the wage of the worker. And finally, the third assumption is that whatever product that is sold was sold in such a manner that a surplus value could be generated in the first place so that the capitalist could rob it from the worker. In other words, surplus theory of value only exists in a positive transaction, that is, where a surplus value can be generated in the first place. Now, correctly identifying those assumptions are crucially helpful in order to deconstruct their theory, because it simply cannot exist without them. For instance, if we were to deconstruct the third assumption, we can do so by a thought experiment, where the cost of labor is $50, the cost of materials is about $25, while the product that was sold is only $50. The surplus value is simply not present here. You need to assume that the transaction will be positive for the capitalist in order for this to work. However, the best type of tactic on your behalf will be to challenge the idea that you can objectively measure how much money a worker is owed by the capitalist. You can either start by discrediting worker hour wage, as it is a known fact that workers' productivity tends to decline with the amount of hours they work, as well as their quality of work tends to go up and down throughout the day. Or you can discredit the solutions that your opponent will propose, but in any event, your strongest weapon here is deconstructing their assumptions and appealing to subjectivity of measuring value that typically they would agree with if the conversation were to be about art or music, or even culture. Same is the case with the labor theory of value, as I would argue. And frankly, even if you assume that it is true and take it as it is, you can deductio ad absurdum the shit out of it by bringing an example of a marble statue one person had spent 50 hours making using pre-modern tools and another person using modern technology in just under 1 hour. And now ask yourself this question: does the former person get 50 times as much money as the latter person if we assume, of course, that person who had spent 50 hours making it was not fired and the cost of materials are equal? As you can see, this equation turns ridiculous if you challenge some of their assumptions or take it as it is and apply their logic to different scenarios. But if that is not enough, you can also appeal to their deepest psyche, which typically revolves around hating the capitalist as a class, and instead you can offer a better alternative to their resentment, such as distinguishing between small and giant businesses and perhaps even red-pilling them in the process. One funny thing I like to do in particular is saying that capitalists as a class are a phenomenon of a social construction that stopped being relevant last century, and instead we should focus on the super rich and improving the conditions of the workers. One thing you should never do, however, is to moralize this issue by justifying the unequal labor relations as a whole, where the capitalist can basically do whatever he wants to do, especially considering that your opponent is of the exact opposite moral framework. So it is logical that you won't be able to appeal to them in such a manner, as it is in my conviction that the defense of private property can be best defended not by the appeal of it being a right, which is circular, but rather by an appeal to its functionality, and it is often the case that the exercise of businesses by the capitalists must be heavily regulated in order to increase social functioning and decrease resentment and Marxist sentiments. Making moral statements about how a capitalist can do with you whatever he wants to do just because you signed a contract will build nothing but a greater resentment towards you and make you look like a bootlicker. Finally, if you like to troll, or possibly you are even a libertarian, what I like to bring up pretty often is known as Taylorism or the scientific management. That is an idea that we can measure the wage of the worker by the productivity of the worker instead of their fixed hourly wage, and that I found sets them very angry, as it is basically the labor theory of value but from a capitalist perspective instead, especially as it appeals highly to objectivity and the understanding of value. Now that was all for today. If you want to watch more videos about me criticizing Marxists, just let me know right in the comments below, and thank you for watching.